living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, can happen to anyone at any age, at any time. In fact, more than 70% of U.S. adults, some 223 million people, have experienced it at some point in their life. Today we'll learn what PTSD is and what you can do if you or a loved one have the condition. Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm Janet Whitmoyer, your host. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. This week we're going to be discussing post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Joining us now is Dr. Elizabeth Kohlstaedt, who is a clinical psychologist. First of all, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, thank you.
And let's start off with you telling us just a little bit about what PTSD is.
Sure. So post-traumatic stress disorder, as you said, is the mind and the body's response to a situation that is overwhelmingly frightening or life-threatening. It could be sexual abuse, it could be a physical abuse, it could be actually even participating in abuse of someone else, but it's the essence is that it's a life-threatening event. And it's the mind and body's response of trying to cope with that. And so the response typically includes intrusive memories of the event. It includes avoidance of anything that reminds the individual of the event. It includes hyperarousal and negative cognitions about future. So it affects both physical and mental functioning. Okay. The thing that I want to emphasize is the word trauma, because it's post-traumatic stress disorder. Trauma is a very specific reaction. It's a very specific event. And it means that it's overwhelming to the individual and it's life-threatening. So it's a lot more than just stress or worry. So many people have experienced a trauma in life, but not all people experience post-traumatic stress from it. Trauma is defined in the mind of the observer, or of the victim, I should say. Mm-hmm. And so one individual might be traumatized by a physical abuse, whereas another individual might not be. So they can see it as a different experience. And to some extent, it's determined by the amount of control the individual has. So, for example, survival from a concentration camp experience for most people was traumatic. But for someone like Viktor Frankl, who's a philosopher, he made meaning out of it. And so for him, that meaning reduced the level of trauma that experience entailed. So trauma is very specific. It means that it's life-threatening and overwhelming, and the definition of trauma is in the mind of the victim.
Okay, that makes sense. So are there different types of PTSD?
There are, most people who have experienced trauma probably will experience some of the symptoms of PTSD after the trauma. So that means hyperarousal, meaning they're sort of jittery and jumpy, and fear and avoidance and negative cognitions, like anticipating danger in the future and not feeling safe, some depression. But for most people, those symptoms disappear. They sort of naturally reduce. But for those individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder, so there's an acute response to trauma, and then there can be a delayed response to trauma. Sometimes, like Yvonne that you have spoken with, may not experience PTSD until years after the trauma. Many people repress the experience of the trauma, so they completely forget that the trauma happened, and the symptoms don't come up until later. So there's an acute kind of response to trauma, and then there can be a delayed response to trauma.
So can you tell us what really causes that trigger to happen, or the response? What causes PTSD?
You know, it's interesting because it's it's almost our bodies and our minds attempt to keep us safe. So if you think about the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, the hyperarousal, let's say, that sort of keeps people on the alert. And so it allows them to be, if something were to happen again, run away quickly. If you think about the negative cognitions, meaning the person becomes aggressive, the person can become aggressive and anticipate danger. That can be a healthy response if you have been in a life-threatening event, to anticipate that another event is going to be life-threatening. Avoidance of things that remind you of the trauma, that can be actually a coping mechanism. So all of those aspects that become a disorder actually are the mind's attempt to cope with what was overwhelming. And so the problem is it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. That's why it requires treatment, is that all of those things, avoidance of the memories, aggression, intrusive thoughts, negative cognitions, all of those end up just keeping the individual on the edge of their seat and jumpy and frightened. So the mind's attempt to keep the individual safe actually ends up making the individual feel much worse in the long run.
Okay. So does PTSD impact a person's mood and their cognitive ability?
Yes.
Okay, can you explain
typically it does. Well, when you're always anticipating danger, it's really tough to focus on the task in front of you. If you're looking for signs of trouble, it's really tough to relax and allow yourself to concentrate. And I want to speak specifically to the memory of people with PTSD. That the people who have been traumatized remember very specific aspects of the trauma and not other aspects. So a woman who was raped might remember the color of a man's sweater but wouldn't remember his face. And so it doesn't impact memory, but that memory of that color of the sweater then becomes sort of ingrained and permanent in that woman's mind.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for really insightful information. We'll be right back to talk to a person that has PTSD after this break. Stay tuned.